It's really a great honor to introduce somebody who is, I think, known to almost everybody here, if not personally, but certainly by reputation, for the tremendous leadership he's provided over many years to issues important to this industry. Most recently, the fight against SOPA, which was a magnificent, historic, and unique event, had many aspects to it. But there's no doubt that the people who are involved and worked on that issue, that it would not have been won had Ron Wyden not stood at the gates and gave us the time, gave us the leadership, and helped corral the energy of our industry in a way that made stopping the bill and then ultimately really stopping the bill possible. Tremendous. I've got bio information. I'm going back to Section 230, what he's done. I won't do a lot, but Ron has been a tremendous ally. And the one thing I will say is, when you think, and I'm going to steal one of his lines that he always uses about being perfect for radio. When I picture what a great senator is, I picture character qualities of leadership, of courage, of being willing to focus on the merits of an issue, of being willing to take extraordinary steps in a bipartisan way when necessary, in essence, to be a statesman. And for that and his leadership, I'm very glad to welcome Ron Wyden.
Thanks, Ed. And I don't want to make this a full-fledged bouquet tossing contest, but suffice it to say, on all of the issues that we have had to wrestle with over the last 15 years, when I think of what it takes to build a coalition, bring people together, we go to our go-to person, Ed Black. And Ed, thank you so much. And I thought some of you have just been gluttons for punishment. I see Kathy, see so many friends, here. I thought what I do, Jamie White, our wonderful staffer, Jamie wrote this really great speech, goes on and on. I can put it in the congressional record and mail it to you. So I thought what I'd do is perhaps just kind of highlight a little bit of where I think we are post-PIPA and SOPA, and then perhaps, Ed, if we have a few minutes for questions, that'd be great. Softball questions, always welcome at this hour. And to me, we had a hearing yesterday in the Finance Committee on a host of bills, the wireless tax legislation I have with Senator Snowe, the digital goods and services bill that I'm co-sponsoring with Senator Thune of South Dakota. And it seems to me what we are at this point is a critical kind of place in terms of the digital rules of the road. Over the last 15 years, we have managed, whether it is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, DMCA, trying to avoid multiple and discriminatory taxes on electronic commerce, we've managed to lay a pretty good foundation. And yet, prior to the fight over PIPA and SOPA, when it came to the big debates in Washington, D.C., the powerhouses, particularly Hollywood and the record labels, they would go out and hire members of Congress, and the joke always was we'd hire a bunch of geeks. And the theory was that when the crunch really came, and I can tell you 2 weeks prior to the vote in the Senate on the measure that would have overridden or sought to override the hold that I had on PIPA, I had a hold on both PIPA and its predecessor, COICA, the general feeling in the United States Senate is our side would get in the vicinity of 20 votes, and there was a discussion of whether we would have that many votes. The sort of institutional power and clout was always, look, they've got more than 40 United States senators, they've got business and labor, and by the traditional calculus in the United States Senate, that was the ballgame. That's it. And what happened, particularly on January 18th, is more than 15 million Americans weighed in with discrete kind of communications, and in effect, now, as we take the next steps in writing the digital rules of the road, our side has a real place at the table. We're not an afterthought, but we have a real place at the table. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with that kind of new opportunity for addressing some of our concerns? And for me, what I can tell you in terms of our special kinds of priorities, and I chair the Senate Finance Subcommittee on international competitiveness and trade, is I want to make sure that we are in a position to, in effect, export our strengths, like Section 230, the safe harbors found in DMCA, to the rest of the world, and that they actually get locked in to future trade agreements. Suffice it to say, I think this group understands that when it comes to addressing copyright issues in foreign jurisdictions, the best approach is to look at it from an international trade perspective. And that's really what we do in terms of dealing with unfair imports. And to ensure that the net is open in foreign markets, American digital goods and digital service providers have got to have access to foreign consumers, and we accept the fact that the net is an economic engine, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. And we are going to have some very good opportunities, particularly with TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And also, I think there are going to be some opportunities in the debate with respect to Russia and Jackson Vanik. And I want it understood that a special priority for me in these upcoming trade agreements is to put in place the kind of global trade disciplines that are going to keep the web open worldwide, to make sure that foreign regimes cannot discriminate against American digital content. And we've started to make some headway, but suffice it to say, we still have a long way to go. We were able to convince the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, for example, to demand binding disciplines on the ability for American firms to move data across borders. That certainly is a welcome proposition, and you see that in the context of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But obviously, there is a lot more to do. And the legal framework that we began to put in place literally in the middle 1990s with Ed and Danny Weitzman and a whole host of others, that's been so conducive to the development of the growth of the net, and particularly the movement here in this country of digital goods, of networks and the digital economy, has to get a broader set of opportunities to play a prominent role in our trade agenda. So, put the legal protections like Section 230 and the safe harbors found in DMCA in our trade agreements. Make sure that the principle of fair use is seen as a legitimate one in protecting intellectual property rights in trade agreements. And recognize that you cannot say you are breaking down foreign trade barriers for the net if you ignore that American social networks are going to face a legal death sentence if they don't have Section 230 protections around the world. So let me kind of break the speechifying off at this point, be interested in your thoughts and your questions. There is no doubt that post-PIPA and SOPA, a lot of people on Capitol Hill are checking in now with the technology agenda in a way that we have never seen before. I know that when I put a hold on predecessors, on PIPA's predecessor, what was called COICA, in 2010, everybody said, well, that's interesting. Ron's always been out there talking to us about this internet stuff, and look at all the power on the other side. And in effect, PIPA and SOPA were considered for many members of Congress low-hanging fruit where they could support the effort to deal with piracy without any downside at all. And as we began to push our arguments up the hill, and we constantly felt like we were that classic picture of the little person trying to get the boulder up the hill only to have it come down and splatter on you, our argument that yes, we too were against piracy, but we didn't want to do it at the risk of losing so much of the progress we had made in terms of online policy. People just said, oh, interesting idea that that group of geeks and Ron are pushing, but when we get to the politics, business and labor and 42 senators, we're just going to run over those folks like a truck over a blade of grass. We have clearly won that fight. That is not going to be the future of the way technology policy is made, certainly in my lifetime. But we have a lot to do. To me, this question of extending and exporting some of our key wins and our key kinds of principles to the international debate is what is going to be the next round of key steps. And we're going to have some fights. At one point in our discussion with Ron Kirk in the Senate Finance Committee, when we were talking about this question of people having to sign a security clearance to, in effect, get access to some of the information with respect to even debating internet policy, not proprietary information, not national security information, but internet policy kinds of questions, shows that we still have some work to do to make sure that all sides get aired. That's why the programs that Ed and CCIA sponsor are so important. And again, Ed, for all the good that you all do, know that you're appreciated by those of us on Capitol Hill who saw that you got this decades ago when we began. And I just look forward to partnering with CCIA in the days ahead. Thanks for having me. So let's hear from the floor for a minute or two. It sounds like you've got a galaxy of Congress types, showing up today, and no more filibustering from me. Yeah,
Matt.
Senator, thanks for your work on so many important issues. I was wondering if I could ask you to just sort of tell folks here what the sort of trade landscape looks like in the near future. More specifically, what issues and what trade items should people be focusing on in regards to these issues in the coming months? I know you alluded to TPP and Jackson Vanik, but maybe to sort of give people a sense of where they ought to be paying attention in the near future would be really helpful.
Well, I think looking at those two, because those are going to be, the big ones. And, my sense is, Jackson Vanik, of course, comes up in the context of human rights, where you're going to have, people, in Russia in the context of a trade agreement, particularly one that affects, the internet, they're going to say, how are we going to be able to keep our views and our voices alive in a country that still, in so many instances, looks like it sometimes honors those voices more in the breach than in the observance. So I think you sort of start with that kind of philosophical principle, and then you say, if you accept the view I do, that a big part of what's right in the American economy is the technology sector and the values that we have subscribed to over the last 15 years. Sensible tax policy, Section 230, DMCA, safe harbors, these kinds of principles. What we want to do in every trade agreement in the future is to try to make sure that we can export those principles. We can lock those in to the future, trade agreements. So we'll probably put out, Jamie White is here, many of you know him. He's really the most knowledgeable person on the planet about particularly the intersection of technology and trade. We'll probably put out a list before long of exactly the areas that we think are most likely to be ones that we can actually get in the agreements. But I think Section 230, DMCA, these kinds of principles, if we don't get, for example, Section 230 type protection as we look at trade and bilateral kind of trade opportunities, what we can see, it seems to me, is victories won in the United States unravel in the global marketplace because you have the secondary liability for posters or what have you. You have the kind of relitigation of a lot of the battles that we had here in the United States. And I, for one, and Ed knows the story, I don't want to run the risk of what happened in Section 230 where, in effect, a bill contained two approaches. One that would have been poison for social networks, a big censorship regime, and the other that Chris Cox and I wrote, and we were shot in the tailbone with good luck because the court upheld ours and rejected an approach that might have actually kept social networks from getting off the ground. At least that's what they tell me. I mean, the lawyers for a lot of those early social networks say, if we had not gotten the kind of sort of layer of protection that came in Section 230 so that we wouldn't be liable for somebody we didn't know anything about who posted something, we're not convinced we could have gotten the investment dollars that we were able to generate early on. So we can't run the risk of having those kinds of battles in the context of our trying to export digital goods and digital services. And Gesundheit, we're really, as the chairman of the Finance Committee, I often think about what it looked like for my predecessors. They would essentially be moving steel and timber and, in a sense, goods that we always saw as big and bulky, and they were moved from point A to point B. And that is still extraordinarily important to our economy. And I take a backseat to nobody, for example, in terms of exporting finished wood products, which continues to be enormously important to my state. But when we're talking about digital exports and cloud computing and you're going to need a different set of rules. And what we have always done in America, and Ed Black makes this case with great eloquence, we've always said, ever since we saw the railroads develop, we've always said that with the advent of new technology, we're going to try to find a way to keep up with the times and to keep up with the rules in order to be able to tap those opportunities. At one point in yesterday's hearing, when we were talking about wireless and multiple and discriminatory taxes, we said, hey, we get the bottom line on smartphones in terms of what the challenge is. We got smartphones and we got dumb tax policies. I mean, that's sort of the summation. And in a lot of these areas, and for purposes of this morning, let's take Section 230, DMCA, some of these kind of key principles is what we want to embed in the trade agreements. We'll have a longer list to put out for the future. We want to embed those kinds of principles that have shown so much promise here in this country into the international, commercial, arena. And as we add to them, which we hope to do with wireless and the like, I mean, the policies for wireless, for example, are almost as if you had those gigantic mobile phones, those mobile phones that were practically the size of a basketball. And nothing really has been updated. And what I want to do in the days ahead is start exporting our sensible policies that have promoted growth and innovation in the digital economy. And as we add to them, which I think we will as we look at wireless and other areas, build that into our global trade agenda for digital goods as well. That's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but I think that's the heart of it.
Let me just throw one. We're running a little late, but from your perspective, we saw in the SOPA-PIPA battle a degree of bipartisanship that that the tech industry tends to like. And I guess one, I hope, your judgment would be that that's likely to continue and improve. Secondly, though, we also had experience from the administration, from different views, from different agencies, different points of view. Do you think the administration has swung more clearly into really a strong pro-technology position following the SOPA battle? In your contact with them, are they signaling much more openness to those concerns?
Ed, I'm hopeful. And of course, it's no secret that there was a real battle royal in the administration on PIPA and SOPA with a number of very, very influential people in the administration, in effect, taking the position that particularly, PIPA was the logical approach and certainly the approach, to build on. But the president, to his credit, really saw what this was about. I think there have been some people in the White House, particularly David Plouffe, who's very up on the digital, economy and has seen the potential. And suffice it to say, we made sure that at the White House they were playing the Obama girls, wonderful contribution to this debate. Did any of you see the little online video the Obama girl made? We still have it. We still have it playing in our office almost nonstop. So I think that there will continue to be this debate. I will tell you that we haven't made as much progress with the USTR as I would like. If you look at the exchange, for example, that I had with Ambassador, Kirk, on the points with respect to getting a security clearance in order to see some of the papers surrounding internet policy, we've got some more to do. But I think given where we've come, one, given what we were up against, the fact that there were a lot of people in the White House with very close connections to Hollywood and the like, and the president's a very helpful statement down the home stretch, where he specifically said it was important to look at other approaches, like the open bill that Chairman Issa and I and Sir Cantwell and Sir Moran, a whole host of us, Democrats and Republicans, had been pushing. You've got to again say that the contribution that they made at the end was to say, look, there is more to this than the Hollywood point of view. That's what they did at the end, and that was very helpful, much appreciated. Now I've got to get the USTR to pick up on some of what our agenda is about, and we had a little bit of spirited debate on in the Finance Committee when Ambassador Kirk was there. But you're absolutely right, Ed. This is not, a partisan, issue. When you talk about the future of digital, goods and digital goods exports and the kind of thing we're talking about, there's not a Democratic Section 230 and a Republican Section 230. There's a smart way to ensure that you can have the growth of digital goods in the global marketplace, and that is to build on what is a demonstrable success in our country. And if Chris Cox was here, who was my co-author in this, he would tell you we never once in the whole evolution of Section 230 had a discussion about what was the Democratic position on secondary liability and posting and the Republican position. We said we better get this right, because if the country passes the alternative, which at that point was a full-scale censorship regime, it would have turned websites into web cops. We would have been trying to police all kinds of things that nobody could have possibly imagined, and literally millions of postings. Never once was there a partisan aspect to it, and that's one of the things that's so enjoyable about this debate. I understand you're getting backed up and you've got speakers assembled. If anybody has one last question that they are just absolutely burning to ask about, I want to cover that. But I know you got a lot of speakers.
Such a great dialogue, and we know we can continue it offline.
To be continued. Many thanks.